Ciao, and welcome to Immersion Travel Italy, where we don't just visit Italy, we experience it. I'm Caterina Ferrara, travel blogger, travel author, and your host. Today's episode is our sixth of the Regional Capitals of Italy series following Turin, the capital of Piedmont, Bologna and Emilia-Romagna, Milan and Lombardy, Trento and Trentino Alto Adige, Venice and Trieste, and Friuli Venezia Giulia. And today, this episode will be about Genoa, the capital of the region of Liguria. Liguria is a narrow crescent of coastline in the northwestern part of Italy that curves along the Ligurian Sea. It's wedged between the Maritime Alps and the Mediterranean, stretching from the French border to the west and Tuscany to the east. This is the Italian Riviera, a thin strip of coast backed by steep mountains where towns cling to hillsides and the sea is never far away. Genoa is roughly in the middle of this arc and the largest city, with its historic power being the center of the entire region. We arrived in Genoa by cruise ship from Barcelona, which, as it turns out, is fitting. For centuries, ships arrived from Spain carrying silver, trade goods, and passengers into this harbor. We were following a very old route. As we approached the port in the early morning, Genoa revealed itself slowly. The city rises steep and compressed from the water, buildings stacked tight against the hills. There's no grand waterfront promenade like you find in Nice. No sweeping bay like Naples. This is a working port with cranes, container ships, layers of buildings climbing upward into the haze. Genoa is a city shaped by necessity rather than beauty. Wedged between the Ligurian Sea and the Apennine Hills, Genoa had nowhere to expand. There was no broad plain, no open countryside, no room to grow into Italy. So the city grew upward and outward instead. Tall, narrow buildings rise tightly together. Streets shrink into alleyways. Light filters in rather than flooding the spaces. The historic center feels compressed, layered, and dense. Genoa developed as a city that needed to protect itself, its wealth, and its knowledge from pirates and invading powers. When we disembarked and walked into the old city for the first time, we were immediately swallowed by the caruggi, those narrow medieval lanes that define Genoa. It felt a bit disorienting. I kept checking my phone for directions, trying to orient myself. My husband pointed out something. We weren't lost. We were just in a city built to disorient. To first understand Genoa, you have to understand its relationship with the sea. Unlike Venice, which sat protected within a lagoon, Genoa faced the open Mediterranean directly. Its harbor was exposed, its coastline steep, and access to land routes were limited by the Apennine Hills pressing down from behind. That meant one thing. If Genoa was going to survive, it had to dominate trade. From early on, Genoa became a city of sailors, merchants, shipbuilders, and financiers that rivaled Venice. The sea was the infrastructure. Standing in the old harbor as we arrived, watching the ships and ferries moving in and out, I realized this port has been in continuous operation for over 1,000 years. The scale has certainly changed, the ships are bigger, the cargo different, but the function remains the same. Genoa survives because it controls movement across the water. Genoese ships sailed across the Mediterranean and far beyond. They traded in North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, Spain, and Northern Europe. They carried spices, textiles, metals, and people. They established colonies and trading posts from the Black Sea to the Atlantic. By the Middle Ages, Genoa was no longer just a port, it was a maritime empire. And, like all empires built on trade, the power was invisible unless you knew where to look. What struck me most was that Genoa didn't just move goods, it moved money. Ships came and went, but the real transactions happened behind closed doors, in contracts and ledgers. The sea brought opportunity, and Genoa defined who benefited from it. By the 11th century, Genoa had become a self-governing maritime republic, similar in structure but different in character from Venice. This was a republic run by merchant families. Power did not come from crowns or grand palaces. It came from contracts, ships, banks, and alliances. Genoese families such as Doria, Spinola, Grimaldi, and Fieschi controlled fleets, trade routes, and eventually the financial systems that supported European monarchies. Genoa did not conquer through armies, it conquered through capital. This is one of the most important distinctions in understanding the city. Genoa funded wars rather than fighting in them. In the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, Genoese bankers financed the Spanish crown. They underwrote expeditions, wars, and empires. Silver from the Americas flowed through Spanish ports, but the Genoese financiers controlled much of the system behind it. In many ways, Genoa became the financial engine of Europe, and yet the city remained physically restrained. No sprawling palaces facing the sea, no monumental squares announcing the dominance. Power here was deliberately discreet. Before we talk about Genoa's palaces, there is one name I need to address, and that's Christopher Columbus. Columbus was born in Genoa in around 1451. He spent his formative years here growing up in a city defined by shipbuilding, navigation, long-distance trade, and financial networks that stretched across Europe. This matters because Genoa was never a city of exploration for curiosity's sake. Genoa explored for profit, logistics, and control of trade routes. That mindset, the idea that sea is infrastructure, stayed with Columbus long before he ever sailed west. Although Columbus ultimately sailed for Spain, his background was Genoa. His early exposure to Mediterranean trade routes, Atlantic navigation, and maritime finance helped prepare him for transoceanic travel. He understood contracts, financing, and he understood how to sell a risky voyage to people with money. And here's where it gets even more interesting. While Columbus sailed under the Spanish crown, the Genoese bankers were deeply involved in financing Spain's empire after the voyages began. Silver and wealth from the Americas flowed into Spain, but Genoese financiers helped manage, move, and lend that money across Europe. So even when Genoa was no longer sending ships that way, its financial networks shaped the New World. This reinforces something we've already talked about. Genoa didn't need to conquer territory to exercise its power. It controlled the money behind the conquests, and in the end, that mattered more. Columbus may have sailed for Spain, but his education came from Genoa. If Genoa seems inward-looking, it's because the greatest displays of wealth were never meant for the public. Instead, Genoa developed one of the most unusual systems of aristocratic architecture in Europe, called the Palazzi dei Rolli. These were grand private palaces built by elite families along what are now Via Garibaldi, Via Balbi, and Via Caroli. But these were not royal residences, they were private homes. Here's how it worked. The Republic of Genoa maintained official lists called Rolli of the palaces. When foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, or visiting heads of state arrived, the city did not host them in a royal palace or civic building. Instead, they stayed in one of these private residences, selected by rank. It was brilliant. It allowed Genoa to protect power and sophistication without building a centralized seat of authority. It reinforced the idea that strength lay in its families, not in institutions. We walked along Via Garibaldi one afternoon, and from the street, the palaces don't overwhelm you. The entrances are relatively modest, but when you step inside, we visited Palazzo Rosso and Palazzo Bianco, suddenly you're in rooms with frescoed ceilings, marbled staircases, gilded interiors, and art collections that rival any museum. The wealth was here. It just wasn't placed on display on the street. Today, many of these palaces are UNESCO World Heritage Site, but they remain easy to miss unless you know what you're looking for. The rise of Genoa. Genoa's greatest rival was certainly Venice, and the two maritime republics clashed repeatedly over trade routes, colonies, and influence. Genoa also faced pressure from Pisa, much closer by, from the Holy Roman Empire, and later from France and Spain. Internally, the city was marked by factional conflict between powerful families. Alliances shifted, exiles were common, power changed hands repeatedly. The instability explains much about Genoa's architecture and urban form. Narrow streets limited invasion. Towers allowed families to defend themselves. The city was built to withstand both external and internal attacks. Even the harbor was designed defensively. Walking through the caruggi, you start to see it. The city wasn't compact because of geography, it was compact by design. Every corner could be controlled. Every narrow passage could be blocked. This is a city that expected conflict and built accordingly. Speaking of conflict, in 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon again, marched into Genoa during his first Italian campaign. At that time, Genoa was still formally the Republic of Genoa, a state that had existed for more than 700 years. Napoleon abolished the republic outright and replaced it with the Ligurian Republic, a French satellite state modeled on revolutionary France. This marked a definitive end to Genoa's independence as a maritime republic. In 1805, Napoleon went further and annexed Liguria directly into the French Empire. Genoa ceased to exist as a sovereign entity and became a provincial city within Napoleonic France. French laws, administration, and taxation were imposed, and Genoa's port was folded into Napoleon's continental strategy against Britain. The period was deeply disruptive for the city. Genoa had survived medieval war, rival republics, and internal factionalism, but Napoleon accomplished what centuries of enemies had not. He permanently dismantled the Genoese republic. After Napoleon's defeat in 1814, Genoa did not regain its independence. Instead, it was handed to the Kingdom of Sardinia, a decision that was deeply resented by the Genoese citizens. That forced transition is one reason why Genoa later became a strong supporter of Italian unification. In the 19th century, Genoa entered into a new phase as one of the engines of Italian unification. Giuseppe Garibaldi was born here, and the city played a critical role in the Risorgimento that created the United Kingdom of Italy. In the decades that followed, Genoa transformed into a major industrial and port center. Shipbuilding, steel, and manufacturing reshaped the waterfront. For much of the 20th century, Genoa was a working city, not a tourist one, and that remains part of its identity today. Our walking tour. You have to walk in Genoa. There's no way around it. You can't see it from a tour bus. You can't understand it from the port. The historic center doesn't work that way. It's too compressed, too layered, and too confusing. The only way it makes sense is to just get lost. We started our day in Genoa at the Pasticceria Mariscotti di Cavo. This is a historic cafe that visitors and locals both love. It's elegant but understated with dark wood, marble counters, and a quiet confidence of a business that's been doing things properly for generations. The espresso is excellent, the cappuccinos are perfectly balanced, and the pastries reflect Genoa's character. We took our time here adjusting to the city's pace. Once we stepped back out on the street, buildings rose on both sides, streets narrowed, and suddenly we were moving through a medieval port city that once ruled the Mediterranean. From the cafe, we made our way toward the Duomo. After walking through those tight, shadowed streets, the caruggi suddenly opened into Piazza San Lorenzo, and the cathedral appears before you, striped in black and white marble, bold and unmistakable. It's dramatic, almost theatrical, especially in contrast with the restraint of everything around it. The piazza itself isn't grand by Italian standards. It's irregularly shaped, hemmed in by surrounding buildings. But that makes the cathedral's presence even more striking. The facade alone stopped us in our tracks. We'd never seen anything like it. Bands of marble, Gothic arches, sculpted portals, and a rose window that anchors the entire composition. It is one of the most striking cathedral facades in Italy, and somehow Genoa doesn't make a big deal about it. We stepped inside, and Mass was starting, so we decided to stay. Sitting there as the service unfolded, the space revealed itself differently than many tourists would see it by simply walking through. Columns rise in alternating colors, light moves softly through the nave, more deliberate than dramatic. The acoustics carry voices in a way that makes the quiet moments feel present. Locals filled the pews, not crowds, but enough to remind you that this is a working cathedral, not just a monument. What really stayed with me, though, was a detail from World War II. A British shell pierced the cathedral roof and landed inside without exploding. It's still displayed today, mounted on the wall, not as a spectacle, but as a memory. Genoa, a city built on survival, kept it as a reminder. We spent more time in here than planned, just absorbing the space before heading back on the streets. From the Duomo, we entered the caruggi, the narrow medieval alleyways that define this historic core. This is where the city feels most like what you think. The streets tighten, voices echo, shops spill outward. You see soap and bread and seafood being sold, laundries hung overhead. Windows are so close you could reach across the street and touch them. This is working Italy. We walked along Via San Lorenzo, then turned onto Via del Campo, one of Genoa's most famous streets, known not just for history, but for music, poetry, and everyday life. The singer-songwriter Fabrizio De André immortalized the street in one of his songs, and walking it, you understand why. It's unapologetically lived in, with bakeries, small groceries, family-run shops. Everything felt layered and necessary. And then gradually, the city opens up again. Piazza di Ferrari feels almost shocking after the caruggi. Suddenly, there's space and light and movement. This is Genoa's main civic square, and at the center sits its most famous landmark, a massive fountain that dominates the piazza. Water cascades down multiple tiers in a continuous sheet, and when the sun hits it right, the whole thing sparkles. And after the close, quiet intensity of the medieval lanes, this openness and noise feels almost disorienting. Around the fountain rise Teatro Carlo Felice, as well as banks and civic buildings that reflect Genoa's role as a regional capital. This square connects New Genoa and Old Genoa. Streets radiate outward from here. You can feel the medieval city loosening its grip. The fountain marks the transition. Behind you, the caruggi. Ahead, newer streets, wider streets, taller buildings, and a different rhythm. Next, let's talk about Via Garibaldi. Here, the street was built to impress, but in Genoa's way. Lined with Renaissance and Baroque palaces, it was once called the Strada Nuova, literally meaning new street, designed specifically for Genoa's elite families. These are private homes, not royal residences, yet they hosted emperors, kings, and ambassadors. We visited Palazzo Rosso and Bianco, where art collections sit within domestic spaces, paintings by Van Dyck and Rubens and Italian masters, displayed not in a museum, but where they were meant to be. From the palace windows, you can look down on the street and realize something important. Power in Genoa always looked inward first. The grandeur was there, but it wasn't on public display. By this point, we're ready to eat lunch. For lunch, we chose the Antica Osteria di Vico Pala, a well-regarded traditional osteria tucked near the port. This is Genoese food done properly. We ordered trofie al pesto, pesto of course being a traditional food associated with Liguria. Short, twisted pasta made specifically to hold the sauce, served with basil pesto, potatoes, and green beans. It's humble, aromatic, and deeply regional. We also shared farinata, a thin chickpea flatbread baked in a wood fire oven, crisp on the edges, soft in the center, and absolutely essential to understanding the Genoese cuisine. Another famous food of Genoa is the focaccia. The focaccia of Genoa is an airy, dimpled, glossy with olive oil bread, lightly salted. Locals eat it for breakfast or lunch or snacks. Sometimes they even dip it into coffee, which sounds wrong done anywhere else. After lunch, we walked toward Porto Antico, Genoa's historic harbor. The sea reappears gradually here, as it always has. The port has been redeveloped over the years, but its role remains clear. This is where Genoa looked outward, where ships departed for the colonies, where wealth arrived from across the Mediterranean. Another spot I want to mention, we stopped for an afternoon snack at Panificio Mario. A panificio is a local bakery, and it's known for the best focaccia in the city. It's not a cafe, there aren't tables. You order and eat your focaccia as fast food. We grabbed it warm, still glistening with olive oil, and stood nearby to eat it the way locals do, quickly, casually, and without ceremony. By the end of the afternoon, our legs were tired, but our understanding was deeper. Next, I want to mention a few festivals in Genoa, the first one being the Fiesta di San Giovanni Battista. If you want to understand Genoa as a city, this is the festival to experience. St. John the Baptist is Genoa's patron saint, and his feast is the most important religious and civic celebration of the year. It's held on June 23rd, with the feast day being on the 24th. It is not a single event, but a series of rituals that unfold over these 2 days, bringing the entire city together. In the evening, on June 23rd, the celebration begins with Genoa's most symbolic tradition. A large bonfire is lit in Porto Antico, recalling an ancient purification rite and the city's long relationship with the sea. Fireworks follow, reflected on the water of the harbor, creating one of the most atmospheric nights of the year in Genoa. Historically, June 24th was the day the Republic of Genoa renewed its civic identity. Flags bearing the cross of St. George appear across the city. The atmosphere feels proud, and Genoa honors its protector with conviction. In the evening, fireworks return to the harbor and closing the celebration where it all began, at the edge of the sea. Our second festival is Le Vele d'Epoca. This is held in September. If St. John the Baptist explains Genoa's faith, Le Vele dell'Epoca explains its power. This international regatta brings historic sailing ships and classic yachts from across Europe into Genoa's harbor. Some vessels date back to the 19th and 20th centuries. Meticulously restored and actively sailed. For a city built on maritime dominance, this event is deeply symbolic. The ships are not museum pieces. They arrive under sail, they dock in the old harbor, their crews move through the city. The relationship between Genoa and the sea becomes immediate again. When we were walking near the Porto Antico, we saw photographs from the previous regattas displayed along the waterfront. Tall ships under sail, their masts filling the harbor. Even in the photographs, the presence was powerful. Seeing those images made us wish we timed our visit differently, and will definitely be returning in September. Events include regattas, ship tours, exhibitions, and programs. The last event I want to mention is called Rolli Days. This is when those incredible palaces open their doors. Several times a year, the city holds Rolli days, where the Palazzi dei Rolli, many of which are normally closed or only partially accessible, open to the public. During Rolli days, there are guided visits, lectures, and special exhibitions that allow visitors to step inside Genoa's private world of power. There's no costume parade, no reenactment. Instead, you walk through the staircases built for diplomatic display. You stand in the salons where negotiations unfolded. You look out from the windows meant to impress foreign dignitaries without ever revealing the full structure of power. Next, let's talk about some quick day trips. Genoa has always been a city of departure. For centuries, ships left the port carrying goods and people and ideas across the Mediterranean. And today, the same outward momentum makes Genoa an excellent base for exploring the Ligurian coast. The difference now is instead of sailing, you take the train. The railway hugs the coastline, connecting towns that once depended on Genoa for trade and protection. Trains run frequently, the rides are short, and day trips are natural. You can leave Genoa in the morning, spend a few hours somewhere beautiful, and be back for dinner. I want to start with what we did, which was Rapallo and Portofino, which is 2 day trips and 1 perfect day. Our first stop is about 30 minutes on the train from Genoa, and it's Rapallo. When you arrive in Rapallo, the train drops you right into the center of town. You don't need to worry about a shuttle bus or a taxi. From there, it's a short walk to the waterfront promenade, where the palm trees line the lungomare, and the locals stroll with purpose rather than cameras. Rapallo has long been a resort town. It remains grounded. Cafés open early, markets function normally, the pace is relaxed. We walked along the seaside promenade toward Castello sul Mare, a small fortress built to defend the town from pirate attacks. It sits right on the water, compact and sturdy, a reminder that even a resort town needed protection once. We stopped for a coffee near the harbor, and afterward we watched the boats come and go. Boats, ferries, local traffic moving through without drama. If you want great views, there's a cable car that runs up to the Santuario di Montalegro, a hilltop sanctuary with sweeping panoramas over the Gulf. From here, we continued on to Portofino. You've got 2 options. One is to take the train 1 stop further to Santa Margherita Liguria, then continue by bus or boat to Portofino. Option 2, and my preferred option when possible, is to take the boat. Boats run seasonally from Rapallo and Santa Margherita. Approaching Portofino from the water is how the town was meant to be seen. And by the way, we've also approached Portofino by car, and the traffic is unbearable because the coastline curves, the hills rise, and the harbor is tucked in. Portofino is tiny. The harbor is small, ringed by pastel-colored buildings that look almost too perfect to be real. Yachts fill the water. Cafes spill onto the piazzetta. This is a fishing village that happened to become famous. Once we arrived, we climbed up toward the Castello for views of the bay. The walk is steep but short, and from the top you can see why this location worked so well strategically. Complete visibility over the harbor and the coastline. We also visited the Church of San Giorgio, perched above the town. It's quiet and simple inside, a nice contrast to all of the activity below. The views from the church terrace are worth the climb alone. For lunch, we sat at one of the cafes near the piazzetta. The food was fine, but you're paying for location and views, not culinary innovation. It's a very touristy area. Portofino is best appreciated in small doses. We went for about 2.5 hours, which felt right, and any longer would have felt repetitive. It's not that big. After that, we took the boat back to Santa Maria Liguria and the train to Genoa. Let's talk about another town you can visit, which is about 30 minutes from Genoa on a train. It's called Camogli. Sits directly on the water. It's tall, narrow houses painted in warm colors. Fishermen still work here. Locals still shop at the alimentari and the bakeries. Life feels balanced in a way that tourist towns don't. We walked along the pebble beach and waterfront where boats were pulling up onto shore and drying nets in the sun. The historic center is small enough to explore in an hour. Narrow streets, family-run shops, the kind of bakeries where locals line up in the morning for focaccia, fresh from the oven. The Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta sits right on the waterfront, facing the sea with great confidence. It's simple inside, nothing dramatic, but the location says everything about Camogli's relationship with the water. Camogli is known for food. It's an excellent place to grab a relaxed lunch. We ate at Ristorante Rosa, a well-regarded spot right on the waterfront with tables overlooking the beach. My husband had the seafood pasta and he said it was excellent. They also do beautiful grilled fish with local anchovies, which Camogli is known for. If you're only there in the morning, certainly grab a focaccia from one of the bakeries. They're often baked here with onions or olives and eat it while walking along the lungomare. Camellia offers the Ligurian coast without pretense. It's one of my favorite alternatives to Portofino, all of the beauty with less of the tourists. One thing that's easily overlooked from Genoa is that it's also a major ferry port. From the port, ferries depart regularly for Sardinia with routes to Torres and Calgary. You can also sail to Sicily, including Palermo, or cross to Corsica, part of France. Depending on the season, smaller Mediterranean routes open up as well. For travelers planning longer itineraries, Genoa offers something rare, the chance to combine northern Italy with island travel seamlessly. You can explore the historic center, walk the palaces, eat focaccia in the caruggi, and then board an overnight ferry to Sardinia or Sicily, continuing your journey in the way merchants and sailors once did. As we prepare to leave Genoa, one thing stayed with me, and that was the port. The Porto Antico isn't just historical infrastructure, it's still a working port. Ferries are departing, container ships are moving in and out, the cranes are in continuous movement. It's not a museum preserved for tourists, it's a functioning piece of Italy's maritime economy. Standing there and watching the ships be loaded as we were departing on our cruise ship, I understood something about Genoa that hadn't quite clicked before. The city never stopped doing what it was built to do. It moves goods and people and ideas across the water. The scale has certainly changed, the cargo is different, but the purpose remains the same. Genoa survives because it kept working. For more immersive travel stories, practical planning tips, and the companion blog for this episode, visit my website at caterinaferrara.com. If you have ideas for future podcast episodes or questions about traveling Italy, you're always welcome to reach out to me directly. My email is caterina@caterinaferrara.com. This is Immersion Travel Italy, where history, culture, and place come together. Travel slowly, travel intentionally, and let the places you visit tell their stories.